Welcome to Wave Wasters, I'm Matt, and today I'm going to finish up the Otter bite build by glassing the board. Alright, so the final thing to do on the Otter bite is glass it, and on this board I'm going to do 6 ounce on the bottom and double 6 ounce on the top. And on the bottom I'm going to do a resin swirl, and I'm going to use these mica powders, which I haven't used before, so I'm excited to see how they turn out. One of them's a two-tone kind of pinkish blue color, and as you move it in the light it kind of shifts colors, so that's going to be pretty interesting to see how it works in a surfboard lamination. And on the top I'm going to do a color inlay of the same pinkish blue pigment, and then I'm going to do a 6 ounce layer over top of that. So before I jump into glassing this, I'm going to tape off my Finboxes, and I'm going to tape off my deck where I want the resin swirl to end. So let's jump into prepping the board to be glassed. When taping off my Finboxes, I like to run a plastic spreader over the tape. This helps seal the tape, preventing the epoxy from getting under it. To tape off the deck, I like to use masking tape and brown masking paper designed for painting. You can't see it, but I marked out a guide on the board for the tape so that I can get it even on both sides. Usually when I glass channels, I like to use 3M77 spray to hold the glass in place, but since I'm using the Entropy Extra Fast Hardener, I decided to try wetting out the channels and fin patches with the epoxy and letting it gel to hold the glass in place. This didn't work as well as I'd hoped, so in the future I think I'll stick to using the 3M77 spray. To do the resin swirl, I mixed 2 batches of epoxy with my mica powders in each, and then poured them into the same container and gave it a bit of a swirl. Once I had all the glass wet out, I went back and slowly worked the channels to make sure that the glass was tight to them. not great at glassing, and working with a resin that has a shorter pot life, I was worried it was going to be really tricky, but it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. Biggest thing was making sure I got the resin out of the container and on the board as fast as possible to avoid an exothermic reaction. Once the bottom layer has cured, I started sanding where the Cutlap was going to be, along with any bubbles that ended up in the lamination. I was hoping this would make it easier to see the tape, but it actually made it harder in the end, so I ended up only sanding one side of the Cutlap. With the Cutlap done, I went over the edge with the sander to help blend it into the deck and to prevent bubbles. I then taped off the rails to do the deck inlay. For the deck inlay, I'm going with a more subtle swirl, and I'm using more of the two-tone powder instead of as much as the black. I think next time I do a swirl, I'll try using a different technique instead of mixing the two colors in one bucket and see if I can get better results. Once this cures, I'll cut the glass inlay to shape. This time I timed it better and the glass isn't fully cured, but it's cured enough that the knife cuts it fairly easy. Before I add the final layer of glass, I'm going to fix any air bubbles I had in the bottom layer. To fix them, I'm going to do it the same way you would do fixing a ding. First, I'll prep the area and cut some glass patches. I'll then carefully mix some pigment into the resin to match the swirl in the areas that need to be fixed. Once the patches have cured, I'll carefully blend them into the lamination. Once this is done, I'll add my final layer of glass on top. I'm also going to add my rice paper logo to the nose of the board and place it under the top layer of glass. Once the top lamination has cured, I'm going to sand down the lap and blend it into the bottom of the board. I'll then tape off the rails and hot coat the bottom. For the hot coat, I tried using the silicone barbecue brush I've been using, but it's a little too small and takes too long, so I went back to using the spreader. If you're going to use a spreader or a squeegee for your hot coat, don't use too much pressure or you'll end up with really thin spots. You want it to almost float on top of the resin, but you want to use enough pressure so that it spreads it out. Before I hot coat the top, I'm going to add my leash plug. Before I add the hot coat, I'm going to tape off the bottom, leaving a little bit of overhang in the areas I want to catch some resin. This is so I can sharpen up the rail in the areas that need it. To prep my leash plug, I'm going to tape off the top and rough up the outside of the plug with 80 grit sandpaper. I'll then fill the plug area with some resin and push the plug in. Once that's done, I'll go on to hot coating the board. Once the hot coat is cured, I'll sand down the board and tape off where I want my pin line to go. For my pin line, I'm just going to use black acrylic paint, and once the paint has dried, I'll pull off the tape and add my gloss coat over top. Alright, I now have the board gloss coated and I'm going to sand it nice and smooth, and I also added some extra resin to the channels just to beef them up a little bit, so I'm going to hand sand those out so they're nice and sharp, and then I will run through the grits on the board and I'll stop probably around 600, and then I will hit it with a compound that I have that'll take it to around 2000 and give it a nice glossy finish. So let's jump into giving the board its final sanding. I'm not going to show the whole process of sanding and polishing. It's a long, repetitive process, especially on boards like this with lots of contours and channels. Big thing is to take your time and not rush this stage, which I find I do often because I want to get the board in the water. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how this board came out. It's not perfect, there's lots of little things I need to work on. A few spots had small bubbles in the glass that I had to patch over when sanding. I think if I stuck with the 3M spray like I normally do for channels, I wouldn't have had bubbles as bad in the lamination. Not that there were lots, but more than I normally have. The mica powders also came out sick. The two-tone gives this galaxy purple look to the black that only really shows up in the sun. However, the pigments seem to blend together easier than the other pigments I've used, and you need to use a lot more than you think to get the colors to pop. For me, this board is less about how perfect I glassed it and more about how it surfs. With that being said, here's the final board, and I look forward to seeing how it surfs.